I'll go ahead and I'll start. Hey, everyone, it's Gordon Einstein and crew. I'll introduce them in a moment. Welcome to the first episode of, if you like, of the Nimbus Academy series on DeFi, which of course is decentralized finance. We're going to be going through a couple of scenarios, talking about what DeFi is, how to catch the wave of the future, where DeFi is going, and how to avoid the pitfalls and leverage opportunities here. But before we get into all that, I'll just do a quick introduction of myself, and then we'll focus mainly on our esteemed guests. Again, it's Gordon Einstein. I'm the founding partner of Crypto Law Partners. I'm here in Dubai with these fine gentlemen, and we'll start with George. George, please introduce yourself.
Yes, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Jorge Sebastiao, an advisor within the Nimbus, and I'm also here to, as well, introduce the Nimbus Academy. Nimbus Academy is an education initiative within the Nimbus project to provide knowledge and information about the usage of DeFi projects and DeFi technology. As you know, DeFi stands for decentralized finance. And one of the most important waves that is in the process of creating what we can call the modern wave of digital banks, or banks without bricks and mortar. However, we do realize that one of the biggest issues in the blockchain space is that there is not too much knowledge specifically for the non-technical individuals. And that's primarily one of the objectives of the DeFi Nimbus Academy, is to provide knowledge to the non-technical person about DeFi protocols, business usage, and how to better protect themselves as well.
It's a great initiative. I think it's perhaps long overdue, and I think Nimbus Academy is doing a great job by stepping up and taking charge of this. Mohammed, it's a pleasure to see you. Please introduce yourself and give us your origin tale and your involvement in DeFi and everything else.
All right, thank you very much, Gordon, for having me and Nimbus Academy. So thank you for all. My name is Mohammed Salman Anjum. I'm the chief mate of InvoiceMate, which is a platform for invoice management system, and also it will be having a DeFi platform for invoice financing in future. So another hats which I wear are I'm the BSV hub lead for Middle East and South Asia. Again, that is a role where I have to help the BSV blockchain ecosystem to promote in the market. And lastly, I'm also the PricewaterhouseCoopers trainer as well for blockchain and fintech.
You sound pretty busy. And then busy guy. So, and when and how did your interest in decentralized finance spark?
Yeah, it is like, first of all, I've been in the space of blockchain for the last 5 years, started as an educator. So been assessing what are the use cases of blockchain. So of course, DeFi being a classic use case for blockchain and the finance sector especially. So that's how I got into the introduction to the DeFi element. But unfortunately, over the years, we have been seeing that the blockchain scene is like always capturing up some hype ground, and then before it actually gets into the adoption, things move on, and there is another hype ground comes in. Like these days, it's an NFT who is the darling of the blockchain world. So yes, it is like been a student of DeFi for last, we can see, if we say, for 3 years. But and also now coming up with the project on DeFi. But the most important thing for me is that we as a blockchain ecosystem as a whole, we need to adopt or implement some kind of use case of blockchain, and then move on.
Interesting. Thank you. And George, maybe you mentioned, but I don't know if you went into depth. What was your epiphany moment with DeFi, or how did it grab you?
See, the key thing aspect about DeFi that makes it unique. First, DeFi came as one of the implementations of blockchain. That's number one. Number two, the key element that enabled DeFi to actually take place is the technology known as smart contracts. This technology was introduced originally with the Ethereum platform. Smart contracts are actually not smart, and they are not actually contracts, but smart contracts are pieces of code that actually execute on the blockchain, and they enable you to implement complex solutions in a complete transparent way. Of course, because they're pieces of code, they need to be audited by a third party and examined for things like, for example, vulnerabilities, etc. But beyond smart contracts, there's another element of DeFi that is also kind of a very major game changer, and that is the concept known as DAO. And DAO stands for Decentralized Autonomous Organization. And it is a capability of implementing through smart contracts a modern organization that actually lives on the blockchain. That really means that the individuals that participate in a DAO organization have the capability to perform the same roles that they do in a normal organization, but they're actually doing it in a decentralized one. So they're able to make decisions about the directions that that organization takes. So specifically, if we're talking about DeFi, you'll be able to select which directions does the DeFi project take, what are the priorities of the project, and by the voting power of each member, they make decisions about any kind of selective of the projects that have priority to the entire team. So this enables a much more collaborative and also decentralized approach, but again, managed by the power of a smart contract. So I think the combination of these two or three technologies together is definitely a game changer in the blockchain today. Of course, there's many challenges, and we'll be discussing them today as well.
So interesting technical background on what enabled DeFi, but a lot of what we're going to be talking about is the risk and opportunity that's associated with DeFi. I want to hit first what problem or problems does DeFi solve, and then we'll get into the risk associated with it and how to take advantage. So George, I'm going to stay with you for a minute, and then we'll go to Mohammed for an extended period. George, just I always say, explain it to me like I'm 5. What's wrong with the current state of things that DeFi addresses?
Well, DeFi enables you to accelerate much greatly the implementation within blockchain. And let's take something very simple. Centralized exchanges have been around for quite a number of years, about 7 years plus, some of them as much as 10 years, like Mt. Gox and so on. Mm-hmm. However, centralized exchanges have grown quite not so rapidly. Once decentralized exchanges were introduced, again, power of DeFi, they were able to overtake the size of the traditional centralized exchanges. Why? Because we had or achieved max adoption much sooner. They enable people to select on which exchange to actually perform their trades. And the onboarding process to decentralized exchanges was much faster. Of course, this is on the plus side. On the minus side is, for example, simple things like KYC or know your own customer were not as well performed in decentralized exchanges. So the regulators are actually having a look on how to combine KYC and AML functions within decentralized exchanges.
Interesting. Now, Mohammed, I'm going to pass it to you. Let's take an even bigger step back. Before we talk about centralized exchanges for crypto, let's talk about centralized finance in general. In other words, finance, the moment it existed prior to the publication of the Bitcoin white paper, and as it's continued from there, just taking the traditional world of financial institutions and traditional world of financial regulation, what does DeFi offer that's not available in this other prior legacy world?
Yes, exactly. There, I wanted to go myself. That what were the gaps of CeFi which DeFi can plug in, and especially if we see things, everything evolves, and with the time, some of the points which are referred by George are very valid. That scalability was a missing link for CeFi. Then there were issues of digital transformation 2.0. Like now we are living in 2021. We have tools now which can enable CeFi to even go beyond CeFi territory. So centralized solutions of financial services were having some pitfalls, and DeFi came into existence only to come up with the solutions of those pitfalls. So as I mentioned, the tools are now with us, Digital Transformation 2.0, which includes data analytics, blockchain, AI, and so on and so forth. So there was a lack with the CeFi issues institutions, and there was an opportunity for the DeFi mainly through mainly through the scalability approach, and also inclusion is I think probably the biggest factor which comes with the DeFi. That a lot of issues with the CeFi is the inclusion, and we have been talking about it for a number of years now, but we need to bring new avenues for that reduction of inclusion, and DeFi is one of that. So these are probably the main triggers: digital transformation 2.0, inclusion, and third, of course, with everything evolves, digital transformation is also evolving, and that is bringing the avenues for the DeFi.
Fantastic. And I'll add my own sort of point of view here. The centralized finance, the banking system, and other financial institutions clearly helped humanity develop over time. The ability to store your capital mostly safely, say in the form of a bank account, and the role of a bank in terms of aggregating capital so it can make larger loans than anyone could individually, clearly serves a function by itself, and then there's sort of a market coordination function there. So banking and the regulation of banking served great functions for a long period of time. But Mohammed, as you mentioned, of course, there's access issues. If there's many people in the world that are unbanked or getting substandard banking services, there's issues there. I'd add to that there's a core fundamental issue with banking and similar financial institutions, which is by definition, they're an intermediary. They stand between the capital holder, in other words, the person who's actually the lender, and the capital borrower, and they're putting themselves in the middle. And that intermediary type function, on one hand, enables these transactions to take place, capital aggregation and loaning. On the other hand, it imposes costs that are, I think, to many people's mind, increasingly unbearable. If you're opening up a simple savings account or certificate deposit, you're getting paid very low interest at all. In fact, some banks impose fees on you for the honor of opening an account with them and keeping your funds with them. Nonetheless, loans are not particularly cheap, even in this very hyperinflationary type environment. And there's restrictions. There's restrictions of choice. If I have money and I put it in a bank, I'm not choosing who the bank lends to. I have no control over it. And there's a reduction of autonomy by the capital holders. They also, on one hand, government regulation of banks and financial institutions is a good thing. It provides for stability. It provides for certain common standards. It provides maybe a lender of last resort in case the bank has a problem. But there's downsides to this also. There's perhaps overly invasive government regulation where your funds, even though they're your funds that they're stored with the bank, may be subject to seizure, and maybe not always correctly, maybe not as a result of due process. I'm old enough to remember when Cyprus nationalized its bank accounts and just left people in the lurch, and that's not the only time that's happened. And I fear to say, I think I'm seeing signs of that coming now with the undermining of fiat currency and hyperinflation and taxation. I think I'm seeing even more developed economies, if you like, their government's getting aggressive with their regulation of financial institutions, not always to the benefit of those institutions' customers. So I think centralized finance has served a great role in the past, but there's bugs in the system. And George, you mentioned smart contracts and the like, and I thought it was funny what you mentioned about smart contracts are neither smart nor contracts. I say that's 90% true, but the lawyer in me wants to sort of tease that out a little bit. I think part of what makes DeFi exciting is the ability to have programmatically handle commercial transactions that don't go through analog human processes. They don't go through maybe non-deterministic discretionary things or rules that are imposed by banks, but you can programmatically deploy your capital. You can programmatically go to the market that pays you the most interest. You can programmatically determine what platform is secure and what platform is not secure. So to me, that's a bit of the promise of DeFi.
Actually, I agree with you in the sense that I believe that DeFi really puts finance in the control of the user instead of in control of decentralized authority. So the smart contract forms the rules by which that inclusion is done. But there's many other aspects that I think are quite unique. The first one is that you are in control as the user. That means it's the user who connects their own wallet to the DeFi platform. So at any point in time, the control of the funds are actually in the user's wallet. So the user makes that decision. And when the transaction gets completed, the transactions or the funds automatically get returned to the end user's wallet. This does not happen in most centralized exchanges. The second one is the capability of addressing the point that you brought forward, which is called banking for the unbanked. Today, we have several billion users. We have 1 billion users in Africa. We have 1 billion users in India. We have 1 billion users in China and kind of another 1 billion users in the rest of the world. A good percentage of these are unbanked. So DeFi enables us to introducing banking or accessibility of banking and finance to those that do not. Other things that you can do very basically off the board is things like, for example, you have an amount in your wallet, you can deposit it, and you automatically can start doing things like earning interest. So this is in DeFi known as staking. What this allows you to do is that in the past with digital assets and digital currencies, what you did is you did not earn any returns. So by staking that digital currency for 1 day, 1 week, 1 month, you automatically get some active returns from that digital asset. The reverse is also true. Let's assume that you need extra money for a short period of time. So DeFi enables you to obtain a loan or to obtain insurance. So this again is another type of very facilitated inclusion within the system. And thirdly, I think that DeFi also enables us to tie the real world with the digital world. And I usually call this asset tokenization. And asset tokenization has many elements. Certainly the most common one is what we call the wrapping of basically stable currencies. So today we can take something like the euro or the US dollar, and we are creating a digital version of that, even if the governments are not even ready. So today, without the governments, the CBDCs of the world are already operating and have been operating very, very successful. And DeFi enables us to do that in a stable currency. So that means if I'm paying for a coffee and the coffee is $2, when I have $2 digital dollars in my wallet, it stays $2 until I actually pay for the coffee and so on. Apart from stable currencies, we can also wrap other assets. These assets could be, for example, things like real estate, which appreciate in capital, could be assets like gold, which enables us to, for example, have protection against hyperinflation or against potential market crashes. So it allows us to have a mix of assets that we can easily trade very rapidly. And the trading of these assets actually gets done in the decentralized exchanges. Nimbus has got their own decentralized exchange known as Nimbus Swap, but obviously the most popular one today is Binance. As you know, they have grown extremely rapidly. And other than Binance, there's other ones, things like Uniswap, SushiSwap, and so on. So it's a very competitive marketplace. And that really means...
Actually, sorry to interrupt. I was actually going to, I thought you were just talking about DEXs, and I was surprised you mentioned Binance. I thought you were going to go right to Uniswap. So
No, Binance has got a DEX as well. And most people have to realize that there is actually 3 Binances that operate today. There's Binance US, there is Binance Worldwide, and there's Binance the DEX. And Binance the DEX functions exactly the same way as Uniswap.
Great clarification. So George, let me, that was fantastic. Let me sort of keep going with the program here, just because I need to. So we've talked about what is DeFi. We talked about it, what solutions it solves, what problems are posed by centralized finance that DeFi or decentralized finance solves. Let's talk about the risks that are inherent or maybe still being worked out in the DeFi industry? And then how can one sort of avoid these traps? And let's focus on maybe actionable steps we can take. So Mohammed, let me pass it to you. What risks do you see in DeFi being presented by DeFi in general, and specifically for those looking to enter into the DeFi field today?
Yeah, first of all, the market of DeFi itself is a risk because it's an immature, newbie in the whole scene. So a lot of norms have to be formalized, and plus, it's again the mature norms needs to be there. So the first risk itself is about the market, and then is the liquidity risk, like which includes the volatility involved with the cryptocurrencies and similar kind of associated risks. And the most important, the third one, is basically the technology risk itself. World, to me, is not still savvy enough to handle DeFi and the applications associated to it. So it still, and also those apps have those platforms have their security issues, and there are other technological issues. So to me, these are the three major risks, and everyone needs to be having good caution on these three before they jump into the DeFi space. But that doesn't mean that these risks will fade off and then they come in. No, risks are always there. Even with the CeFi, there are similar kind of risks are there. But you need to mitigate them. You need to manage those risks and then do the trade or whatever things you do in the finance sphere. So these are the three risks to me are on the highest ranking.
Interesting. You know, there's a logical fallacy called the Nirvana fallacy, which is when you take a new technology or new opportunity and compare it to the perfect world as opposed to the world you actually have. And I think there's a tendency for people who are maybe biased against crypto or biased against decentralized finance to compare it against some perfect world that doesn't exist, when really the thing to compare it against perhaps is the world of centralized finance, and ask ourselves, not is this perfect, but is this better than what we have, and does it have the potential to become even better in the future? I think from that standard, DeFi is certainly not perfect, but it looks reasonably good. I mean, I think we all remember Danske Bank siphoning out 300 billion of Russian funds through its AML KYC failures, and you got to keep something like that in mind. You know, banks are not perfect in this area as well. I think I'd also personally add as a risk to DeFi that sometimes it's not just immature technology. Sometimes it's not just that norms haven't developed, but you do sometimes have sketchy projects. You have this expression of a rug pull, where the people starting this project are rushing into market, perhaps maliciously leaving openings or holes. They're publishing their smart contracts, but maintaining admin access. They're maintaining backdoor governance controls. They're not all good people, and they're not all necessarily mature people. And you can argue that code is law, and you shouldn't blame them for these things. But it really does shake faith in market. I think we saw that with Sushi Swap. You know, with Chef Uni or whoever he was. There's just some funny stuff that happens. So I think on an industry-wide basis, we need these primitives or norms developed, but we also need to look at each individual project and the team members and really look at what, if things go wrong, what can they do? So that's my 2 cents. And George, let me pass it to you. So the risks in DeFi, especially the risks that a newbie or a new person would encounter, and how do they manage that risk?
Well, I think you mentioned some important elements. One is you should have a team, not an invisible team, so people know that who is in charge of this project. The second thing is this project should have a roadmap that outlines what is the deliverables that are being done over a period of time. And if those deliverables are being met, as you know, in IT, things are always a little bit late, maybe by a few weeks, a few months, there's bugs you need to fix. But if they're within reasonable, then this is good. The third thing that is extremely important is that smart contracts are code, and like any other code, there is bugs. The most important thing about smart contracts, they should be audited by one, preferably 2 third parties. And there's companies like Zoico, Hacken, that enable to ensure trust in those smart contracts to make sure that there's no bugs, there's no vulnerabilities, and there is no backdoors. The third thing that is also important beyond that is awareness for the user, because the user is in control of his own wallet. So if you don't teach the user about phishing attempts, about malware that could exist either on their mobile or their desktop, which could easily empty the values that are within their wallets. And this has nothing to do with the project itself, but the user needs to be aware of all these risks so that he knows how to manage them. And obviously,
Lander, that's a great point. I'm just going to highlight it and I'll pass it back to you. I was aspect of DeFi, but if like Bitcoin may be perfectly secure, but if your Bitcoin wallet isn't secure or the exchange you have it on isn't secure, you can have a real problem. So I think you're bringing up a very good point, and please continue.
So once we combine all these elements together, then we are able to achieve a much better overall security. So I think there is a responsibility on the project team, but there is also a part of the responsibility that stands with the user each day. And I think that's one of the primary reasons of creating this Nimbus Academy is to empower the user to build this better awareness about the solutions that are being provided, the risks, and then to take the necessary step to actually minimize those risks. I think the final thing that I think is important is the users need to also very clearly understand the products and services being provided by the DeFi project. And this responsibility stands within the project to make sure that they clearly define what are the terms and conditions and regulations associated with using each of these solutions. So if you're doing staking, if you're providing insurance, if you're providing, for example, trading, what are the transaction fees? So it is important to have complete transparency in all the operations that are being done, because the more transparency that you have, the more trust that will be in place. Obviously, other risks you already mentioned as well is the liquidity providers. Sometimes it has happened in several of the projects where some of the liquidity has been pulled or partially pulled from the project, and this causes the specific value of the tokens to actually drop in price quite dramatically, and the users look at this as a higher risk with them. And the whole arena of blockchain obviously is not independent. So one project exists in the entire space. So they will be affected by the prices of other digital assets and digital currencies, like, for example, Bitcoin, Ethereum, Binance Smart Chain Coin, and so on. So there's an interrelationship between all of these. Other things that are also important that I did not mention is items like, for example, scalability. In periods of high risk and high instability, everybody wants to do their transactions at the same time. And some of the chains do not have the capability to actually process enough of these transactions rapidly. So you should look for projects that are actually able to run in highly scalable chains or blockchains to be able to handle the transaction volumes during periods of instability and high risk.
Fair enough.
The last one is basically transaction fees. So nowadays, as you know, in some of the chains, the transaction fees get extremely high and exorbitant, meaning that any kind of value or returns that you have from the actions that you took place are actually eaten away by the transaction fees being too high.
Very good. And then, so we've spoken extensively about the risks. Now, DeFi is obviously developing and has a lot of promise. One could say, I think last summer was technically DeFi summer, but maybe we're heading into DeFi summer too. Who knows? Mohammed, let me throw this to you. Going beyond the state of the industry now, but going into what's coming next, what projects do you think are interesting? What tokens, what technologies, where do you think DeFi is going? And how does someone new to the field identify these opportunities? And Mohammed, please.
Yeah, first of all, institutional DeFi. I think people misunderstand DeFi when they always consider it as a peer-to-peer. I think they need to understand that peer can be individual, peer can be corporate as well, or business as well, or multiple people as well. So peer-to-peer or B2B peer-to-peer is, I think, the trend moving forward, and that will bring the real adoption to the DeFi. Otherwise, it will stay if as a futuristic problem-solving phenomena for the blockchain ecosystem or events only, that they will consider it as I said, a hyped application for the blockchain. Unless it will not solve the problems of the real conventional businesses, it is not going to be in the summer mode. It will stay in the summer mode only in the events of the blockchain, but not actually in the reality. So for reality, I think what I can see now, applications are popping up which are bringing the DeFi to the institutions as well. For example, I'll just quote one of my own project, which is the invoice management system, and we will be bringing people on that platform to fund or finance the unpaid invoices. So that is a real world's problem. Invoices are the largest used commercial documents, and invoice financing is the third largest mean of the trade financing. So there was a need for a DeFi to jump in. And if you Google today, I invite you to Google now, you will not find a single DeFi solution for invoice financing. I tried a lot, like when we were doing our competitive analysis, I couldn't find. But this is the need. I'm sure there must be other people working on this. We are not the only ones. But for sure, there is a need to solve the real problems with the DeFi rather than just the futuristic problems. So for me, the trend in 2022 or beyond is the adoption, and adoption will only come when you will try to solve the real world or real businesses problems.
Interesting. You got me pondering this a little bit. I think in a way, blockchain provided a solution without a problem to a certain extent. But I've also seen that when you come up with new technologies and new ways of doing things, people sort of invent new problems that they didn't know that they had before, but it lets you do new things. So some of this DeFi development clearly is addressing the systemic issues of centralized finance, but they're also, I think, enabling new forms of finance that didn't exist before. And now that we can do it, we're doing it.
That's the focus. I think from the very beginning, it's always towards the focus is to bring new avenues. There is a lot of scope in solving the existing pain points of the CeFi. And this is one of the examples I just already given to you, that there are institutional requirements for DeFi which can be addressed. And that's where we need to focus as a blockchain community ecosystem. We need to address that side more than solving the new or futuristic avenues.
Or is there enough? I'll be a little bit controversial. I'm going to throw out there that there's probably, I hope there are, or I hope there's going to be enough programmers and enough programming resources that on one hand, there's fantastic problems like yours that are addressing traditional centralized finance issues. And there's also that kid in the college dorm who doesn't know about those issues, but just comes up with something cool. And then all of a sudden we realize that it's generally useful, and maybe both roads are equally valuable, and maybe there's a certain amount of synergy between them. But I agree with your major premise that if you want to mine the world for issues, the place to look most efficiently to identify those issues is centralized finance. George, let me pass it to you. Where's DeFi going? Where's its key growth for tomorrow? And is it new tokens, new projects, new technology, or how do you identify these points?
I think DeFi, there is primarily, I consider three key projects or three key directions that are extremely important. The first one is actually the tying of DeFi with real world assets, whether it happens to be gold tokenization, real estate tokenization, art tokenization. As you see, a lot of work is being done on NFTs, which is kind of a form, and we can introduce DeFi and NFT by combining the two together. The second one that I think is extremely important is, I mentioned the various populations, 1 million, 1 million, 1 million, Africa, India, Asia, but we also have a very big population we must not forget. We have 2 billion Muslims around the world. So things like, for example, Islamic finance, or what we sometimes call ethical finance. So when we're talking about introducing DeFi to this very large population and market, I think we have basically a very big change upcoming. And the third one, I think, is one of the biggest upcoming changes as well, is in payment systems. So far, DeFi has stayed away from payment systems. So people were able to combine DeFi with immediate payment systems, and that means integration with the traditional payment cards or methods or QR codes or digital cards. This will go a long way to also provide inclusion into the DeFi marketplace. So these are considered the three major pillars that are actually going to drive the DeFi adoption in the future.
Mohammed, I presume you're Muslim, yes? So let me ask you a question, because I'm a newbie when it comes to Islamic banking and finance. I've always, my layperson's understanding is that, and I'm going a little bit off our topic, but George, you raised a fantastic question. My newbie understanding is of Islamic finance is that the basic premise there is that you can't pay or receive interest, that there needs to be an alternative method of compensation in a loan contest, and that things sort of, other rules sort of flow from that basic premise. When an automated market maker or an Aave or a compound pays interest, but it's a program or algorithm doing it and not a human being per se, is that Sharia compliant? Do you have any idea?
No, I'll clarify this. First of all, thank you, George, for bringing this, and Gordon also, you're bringing this up. DeFi has a very strong appetite for Islamic finance, no doubt about that. What Islamic finance is, this is just one element that interest-free. The second element is all the prohibited activities, for example, gambling, liquor business, pornography, something 6 or 7 of such businesses, we can safely call them unethical, and especially in our faith. So those unethical businesses, these are the two primary fundamentals of Sharia compliance or Islamic finance compliance. Now, you mentioned if it is happening on through smart contract and there is no Sharia compliance happening, the best part is smart contracts are a good reason for the Sharia compliance, because conventional businesses or conventional finance or the banking requires one side of compliance, which is a normal one, central bank's one. When it comes to the Sharia compliant banking or financing, then you have to adhere 2 sets of compliance factors. One, of course, the conventional one, and then on top of that is the additional one, which is the Sharia compliant issues like is the transaction interest free, is it coming through the ethical channels and all that, and then few other minor elements as well it will have to adhere. So smart contracts can be programmed to assess all these layers. So the best part that's interesting. Yeah. So at the moment it will see that one party in the DeFi is a gambling company, another company is whatever is the business, and that gambling company wants to finance some of their invoices. For example, I'm the other party and I want to get a finance for some reason, but on the other side, the company which is having a liquidity pool for financing is coming through the gambling sources, is coming through the liquor sales sources. So the smart contract will trigger it and will not let it happen. This is the role generally played by the advisory board of the Muslim scholars and all that, but they are very scarce resource, by the way. So for them to have the help of smart contracts is very, very essential and timely, because Islamic finance is booming up, but we are having a shortage of Islamic finance advisors. So smart contracts will take some routine decisions out from their own scope of work, so they can focus on the advanced level concepts of Islamic compliance, Sharia compliance. So this is a very useful case. Yeah.
I feel like we have a whole nother show we need to do on this topic. It's fascinating, and I sort of busted our program a little bit by going into this cul-de-sac, but it was just the comments caught my imagination, and I'm glad we went with it because that's fascinating. So Nimbus Academy, we're going to have an Islamic smart smart contract session. And Mohammed, I think you're a guy.
Would love
Wow.
to.
Okay, but my mind is already kind of spinning with the possibilities here. Okay, so back on track. For someone who's new to DeFi and new to this world, and wants concrete resources to refer to or a place to start, what's the on ramp for understanding? You know, they're sitting at a computer. What do they do next, George?
Well, I think what is important now is to basically educate the community and drive adoption. So as we increase the community around, then of course the projects in DeFi will become more successful over time. We already have the extreme successes from the decentralized exchanges, but however, we need to drive the success by the individual adoption. And I think we need to be able to take the sessions like we have here today and then adapt them to the various communities that we have put together.
I like that answer, but I'm gonna push that answer. So again, newbie sitting at his computer or her computer or his computer or their computer, whatever pronoun you want to use.
Yes.
Okay. And yes, they're fantastically lucky that this Nimbus Academy series is starting, and the best thing ever on the planet. What else do they do? They're sitting at their computer. Google's open. Next step,
open a wallet or download a wallet, install a wallet, go and transfer into that wallet your first dirham or your first dollar, and then connect that wallet to a decentralized exchange, and then perform your first transaction. So take that dollar or that dirham and acquire a specific digital coin. In this case, it will be the Nimbus coin or any other coin based or priority. And then you'll be able to, you're now part of the community. And I think it's important that you take small steps so that you understand how it works. And from there, you learn from these activities. So once you have that specific digital asset, then you can stake it. That means you can stake it for 1 day. And then you see, oh, once I stake it, I got some returns by locking in that digital asset for 1 day. So instead of getting 1 dirham, you'll get 1 dirham and maybe 2 or 3 cents more or fields more. And this is how you learn. You learn by experience and by live trial.
Fantastic. Mohammed, I'll pass it to you. Okay, newbie sitting its computer, follow George's advice, and the next steps. How do they access this world?
So awareness precedes change. So it's the same thing that you need to start with the proper learning. And the best way to learn this space is identify what's in it for you. So that will be my 2 cents, that identify why you want to enter into the DeFi space, whether you want to use it for some of existing problem in your workflow or your business, or you want to solve the problem of some other marketplace or something else. So you need to identify, first of all, the reason why you need to learn or why you need to enter into the DeFi space. What are the opportunities? Where are your strengths? How you can merge them together. And that's, to me, is the first step to enter into the DeFi space.
Fair enough. And I'll throw in a couple of thoughts of my own. There's some websites that are dedicated to DeFi. I think there's DeFi Republic. I think there's DeFi Ant. You know, cute little play on words there. They seem to have, in my opinion, they seem to have good articles. If you want to go down the technical route, the Ethereum.org website has a whole documentation channel that in reasonably plain English explains how Ethereum works. And my belief or understanding is that most DeFi products are either working on the Ethereum blockchain or working on Ethereum compatible blockchains like the Binance Smart Chain. Well, you know, obviously it can work elsewhere, and there's bridges between these different blockchains. But if you want to go from the technical route, I think, you know, you don't need to make yourself into a Solidity programmer, which is sort of the language of Ethereum, but it's good to review or just skim over these materials. I would look at, personally, I would look at the leaders in the DeFi space, whether it's Aave or Compound or Uniswap, whatever, and read their documentation, read their posts, and understand the evolution of these tools and when they've been hacked or had a problem, understand what went wrong, and see if the newer teams are adjusting for it. I personally think Wise Token is interesting because they have sort of fair launch model. It's just something to look at. Also on YouTube, there's a lot of resources on DeFi and just understanding how this all works. Of course, Nimbus Academy is gonna be the best of them all once everything gets published. I guess, obviously exercise caution, obviously do your own research, be aware of other people's agendas when they're promoting something. This space is full of very idealistic people and also full of people who are maybe too aggressive in their claims without telling people about their own personal biases. But when you look at enough material and you just take it all in, you can kind of form a matrix in your mind and cross-check things and develop your own point of view. And then there's experts like the gentleman we have on the show who have lots of material online and should always be speaking with them. Let's sort of bring in this plane, land it safely, and take it from there. So final thoughts on DeFi, final thoughts on where it's going, final thoughts on just anything relating to this topic, and I'll throw it back to George.
I think DeFi is still in the early baby steps. So the biggest adoption and the biggest growth in the DeFi space is yet to come. So, and this growth is only going to come via several things. One is via education, via adoption, and via use cases. So as the use cases mature, and what I mean by mature, things like, for example, dApps or decentralized apps become more user-friendly. So it is important that the customer support and the friendliness of the usability of the apps that interact with DeFi become even more user-friendly. So as this takes place, we will see massive adoption.
Fantastic. Mohammed, please, final words.
Yes, for me, it's probably would probably sound a bit controversial, but to me, the hybrid is the future. C5 plus DeFi, and we need to embrace both sides have to be adjustable to each other. Both sides can coexist. And to me, that's the future, at least for next few years until DeFi takes over. But for me, for next few years, we have to live with the CeFi and improve it with the DeFi protocols.
That was controversial on two levels. I think for DeFi purists, they might be like, clutching their pearls at the idea of collaborating with CeFi. But the fact that you said just for the next few years and then it will be pure DeFi was its own little subterranean controversy right there. That's quite the assertive statement. I'm gonna say, do you want to expand on that a little bit? Do you think the timeline is real? Do you think we're going to pull DeFi in a few years?
We can keep it for the next session, I guess. Now we are, I think, overstretched.
Okay,
but yeah, it's a long debate, and we can take.
We got two shows coming up. We got the Islamic finance on the blockchain show, right? And we got the.
I'm selling myself.
Hey, listen, it's all good. This is a fantastic topic. All right, very good. I want to thank Nimbus Academy for putting this together and making it happen. I want to thank our wonderful guests. We got George and Mohammed. You two are experts in the field. You're very well respected. You have articulate in-depth opinions that are backed by experience and knowledge. And so just really appreciate you all. So everyone watching, I hope this was good for you. Please give us some feedback, and we look forward to seeing you at our next session. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, everyone. Take care.
Okay, all the best. Bye-bye.